The delivery room buzzed with the quiet hum of machines, the steady rhythm of heart monitors, and the gentle shuffling of nurses. Ava Mitchell lay in the bed, sweat clinging to her forehead. Yet a radiant smile spread across her lips as she cradled her newborn sons, Liam, Jace, and Elijah, in her arms. They were her miracles, perfect in every way, their tiny fists opening and closing as if reaching out for her. The warmth of their touch spreading through her chest. "You did amazing, honey," Ava whispered softly, brushing her fingers across their tiny heads, each one a distinct picture of her own hope and joy. She had carried them for months, feeling each of their little kicks and movements. Now, in her arms, they were finally here, and she couldn't wait to start her new chapter with them. This was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life. But then, Thomas entered the room. His smile faltered as he stepped closer, his eyes scanning over the babies. His expression shifted from admiration to confusion, then fear. "What is this?" Thomas's voice was barely a whisper, but the undercurrent of panic was unmistakable. Ava frowned, her heart fluttering uneasily in her chest. "What do you mean?" Ava asked, her voice shaking as she looked up at her husband, wondering what could possibly cause this reaction. These were their children, their beautiful children. Thomas stepped closer, eyes darting from one baby to the next. His hand hovered over Liam's tiny head but froze in midair. They're not white," he whispered, as though the revelation was too much to bear. Ava's heart dropped. "What do you mean, Thomas?" "These are our boys." Thomas backed away, his expression hardening. His eyes, once filled with love, were now dark with disbelief and anger. "Look at them, Ava. They have dark skin. They're black." Ava's world tilted beneath her. She looked down at her sons, her beautiful sons, with their mocha-colored skin and dark curls, and her heart constricted in her chest. She didn't know what to say. I don't know. Maybe it's just genetics. Thomas, you know how things can happen unexpectedly in families. It's not what it seems." But Thomas wasn't listening, his face twisted with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "Don't try to explain it away. I know what this is." The words stung like a slap. "What are you saying? What do you mean?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "You cheated on me, didn't you?" Thomas spat out, his anger bubbling over. "There's no way these are my children." The pain in Ava's chest deepened. "I didn't cheat, Thomas. I swear to you, I didn't. These are your sons." But Thomas wasn't listening anymore. His face flushed red with fury. "I can't do this. I won't," he said harshly, turning on his heel. "Ava, I want a divorce," he said, his voice cold and final as he stormed out of the room, leaving Ava standing there, the weight of his words sinking in. She stood frozen, holding her babies against her chest, feeling as though the world had shattered around her. How could he leave them? How could he leave them in this way? The days that followed were a blur of pain, shock, and confusion. Thomas was gone. His absence was deafening, even in the quiet moments when the babies were asleep. Ava tried to comfort herself by focusing on what mattered, her boys. But it was hard to silence the questions that rattled in her mind. She had been certain that Thomas was the father. They had planned this, dreamed of this life together. How could he just walk away, leaving her to raise their children alone? She walked into the living room one day and stared at the unfinished crib Thomas had built weeks before. His tools lay discarded on the floor, evidence of the home he no longer intended to help build. A note, hastily scrawled in his handwriting, sat on the kitchen table. "I'll be back to get the rest. Good luck, Ava." The note felt like a slap. The words simple and cold. Good luck. That was all he could say after everything they had shared. Ava crumpled the note in her fist, rage rising from deep inside her. She didn't have time to dwell on it. The babies needed her. The following weeks were filled with sleepless nights, constant feedings, and overwhelming loneliness. When she took the boys to the store, the stares were unbearable. The whispers followed her like shadows, each muttered word a dagger to her heart. "Did you hear? David left her. They say the babies aren't even his. They have dark skin. She must have cheated." The gossip gnawed at her, but she did her best to ignore it. It wasn't the first time she had been judged, but the hurt was still fresh. The cruelty of it, how quickly people judged her and her children without understanding anything about their story. When she reached the checkout line, the cashier looked at her with pity. "You doing okay, sweetie?" she asked in a soft, almost apologetic voice. Ava gave her a tight smile. Just tired, she lied, but the pity in the cashier's eyes was unbearable. As the days wore on, Ava felt herself sinking deeper into isolation. Every evening was the same, she would feed and change the babies, then stare out the window. Lost in thought, why did Thomas leave? She wondered. What was it about them that made him leave? Couldn't he see how perfect they are? How much we all need him? She had taken the DNA test months ago. Desperate for answers, the results came back, confirming what she already knew. The boys were Thomas's. There was no doubt, no mistake. And yet, that didn't matter. He had walked away anyway. Ava buried the results deep in her drawer, unwilling to face them. The truth didn't change anything. It couldn't undo the pain Thomas had caused. Ava found herself haunted by Elijah's innocent questions. Where's Daddy? Why doesn't he come back? The ache in her chest grew with every unanswered question. The longing in her children's eyes was becoming unbearable. She couldn't shield them from the truth forever. One day, after hearing Elijah's pleas once more, she sat down and wrote a letter to Thomas. David, the boys have been asking about you. They want to meet you. Please consider coming to see them. They deserve to know who you are. Please, don't leave them in the dark. They're your sons. David, they need you. The letter was her last attempt at reconnecting Thomas with their sons. But deep down, Ava wasn't sure if he'd even read it. He had walked away so easily before. What was stopping him now? Days passed with no word. The mailbox remained empty, and Ava felt the weight of hope slipping further from her grasp. But then, one day, a letter arrived. She hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling as she saw Thomas's name scrawled on the envelope. When she read it, she felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He said he would meet them, but how would that reunion unfold? Would it bring closure, or would it bring more heartache? The day arrived. Elijah, Jace, and Liam were sitting under the large oak tree in the park, waiting for their father. They didn't fully understand what was going on, but the hope in their eyes was impossible to miss. And then, Thomas arrived. He stood at the edge of the park, unsure of what to do next. He had been nervous and unsure, but as he saw his sons running toward him, his heart melted. The flood of emotions was overwhelming. This moment had been 10 years in the making. The guilt, the fear, and the pain had all led him here. Ava watched from the bench, her heart heavy. She had hoped for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what she felt anymore. She had dreamed of this reunion, but there was a bittersweet quality to it. Could she trust him again? Could they rebuild what had been shattered? As the weeks turned into months, the relationship between Thomas and his sons began to grow. It was slow, fragile at first, but it was real. Elijah started playing soccer with his father. Jace began to ask Thomas to read him stories. Liam, the youngest, enjoyed sharing his toys with Thomas and giggling when his father played pranks. For Ava, the process was harder. Every time she saw Thomas with the boys, she felt both relief and sorrow. She wanted to forgive him, but there was still so much pain. She had to remind herself to take one step at a time. Years had passed since that fateful day in the hospital, the day Thomas walked away. But time, it seemed, had a way of mending even the deepest wounds, though it took longer than any of them had anticipated. The Mitchell family was no longer a fractured picture of broken promises and abandoned hope. They had slowly, cautiously, rebuilt their lives together, one day at a time. Ava stood in the living room, watching her sons, now young men, arguing playfully over who would take the last piece of pizza. Their laughter filled the house, the kind of joy she had once feared would never return. There were still hard days, moments when the past reared its ugly head and threatened to pull them backward. But they had learned to face them together. As a family, Thomas, too, had changed. He no longer carried the weight of guilt that had once kept him locked in fear. He had done the hard work, the emotional labor of facing the past, of looking his sons in the eyes and seeing the faces of the boys he had once abandoned. He no longer took his role as a father for granted. Each day he spent with them was a reminder of the love and redemption he had found. On Elijah's graduation day, Thomas stood in the back of the crowded auditorium, his heart swelling with pride as he watched his son walk across the stage. When the ceremony ended, he was the first to embrace Elijah, lifting him up in a bear hug. "You did it, son," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Elijah smiled, his eyes bright with excitement. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." As the family gathered for a photo, with Thomas standing alongside Ava, their sons by their side, it felt like a dream. The old wounds were still there, but they had healed enough to let the light of hope shine through. Ava's heart, which had once been so full of pain and fear, was now full of love and gratitude for her sons, for the family they had become, and for the second chance they had been given. Ava turned to Thomas, her eyes soft with understanding. "We made it," she whispered. Thomas nodded, a smile on his lips. "We did." The Mitchells had finally found their way back to each other. And this time, they were stronger than ever. Their love had been tested, but it had endured. The story wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. A story of second chances, of forgiveness, and of a family built not just on blood, but on love. And in that love, they had found healing, growth, and the promise of a future brighter than any of them had dared to dream. As they stood there together, smiling for the camera, Ava knew that no matter what challenges they would face in the future, they would face them as a family bound not just by circumstance, but by the unwavering commitment to love and support each other through whatever came their way. And that, she thought, was the most beautiful story of all.